The vanishing point. The Nexus Gate hung in space like a massive metal spider, its 8 arms stretching across the void between stars. For 3 centuries, this ancient structure had served as the galaxy's most important hyperspace junction, connecting 7 major star systems in a web of commerce and travel. But for the last 50 years, it had been something else entirely. A trap. The Cathari Empire had claimed the gate as their prize, turning the vital crossing point into their personal toll booth. Every ship that wanted passage had to pay tribute, and the Cathari had never been reasonable about their prices. They took what they wanted when they wanted it, and nobody had ever successfully challenged them. Captain Elena Vasquez knew all of this as her ship, the Horizon's Edge, drifted toward the massive station. She had made this run dozens of times over the past 2 years, each time paying the increasingly steep tolls that kept her small trading operation barely profitable. But today was different. Today, she wasn't planning to pay. Elena stood on the bridge of her modest vessel, watching the gate grow larger on the main screen. The Horizon's Edge wasn't much to look at, a converted cargo hauler with patched hull plating and mismatched engines, but it had gotten her crew safely through. Dozens of runs across hostile space. More importantly, it was about to make history. "Captain, we're receiving the standard hail from Gate Control," reported Lieutenant Sarah Torres from the communications station. The young woman's voice carried the tension that always accompanied visits to Cathari space. "Put them through," Elena replied, straightening her uniform jacket. She had learned long ago that appearance mattered when dealing with aliens who judged other species as inferior. The main screen flickered, replacing the view of the gate with the imposing figure of Commander Zethlock. The Cathari officer was typical of his species, nearly 8 feet tall with gray-blue skin stretched over a skeletal frame, and 4 arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. His people had evolved as apex predators on a world of endless night, and they never let anyone forget it. Human vessel Horizon's Edge. Zethlock's voice carried the usual contempt that Cathari reserved for what they considered lesser species. "You will transmit your cargo manifest and crew roster immediately. Tribute assessment will follow." Elena had heard this same speech countless times, but today she didn't move toward the control panel. Instead, she clasped her hands behind her back and met the alien commander's cold stare directly. "Negative, Gate Control. We're claiming free passage under the Galactic Commerce Accords, Section 12, which guarantees unrestricted movement through all major hyperspace junctions." The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear the gentle hum of her ship's life support systems. On the screen, Zethlock's 4 eyes widened in what she recognized as genuine surprise. In 50 years of Cathari control, no one had ever invoked the old Accords. "The Accords are irrelevant," Zethlock finally replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "The Cathari Empire claims this gate by right of superior force. You will pay tribute or be destroyed." "I don't think so," Elena said calmly. "Dr. Chen, would you care to explain our position?" Dr. Marcus Chen stepped into view beside Elena. The elderly human looked more like a university professor than a starship engineer, with his wire-rimmed glasses and rumpled lab coat. But his mind was one of the sharpest in known space, and he had been working on something special for the past 6 months. "Commander Zethlock," Chen began, his voice carrying the patient tone of a teacher explaining something to a particularly slow student. "Your people have maintained control of this gate through the use of quantum disruption fields that prevent ships from jumping to hyperspace once they're within range. It's quite clever, really. Any vessel that refuses to pay your tribute finds itself trapped, unable to escape while your weapons tear it apart." Zethlock's expression shifted from surprise to fury. "You dare to lecture me about our own technology, human? Your primitive species barely understand the basics of quantum mechanics." Chen smiled mildly. "That's where you're wrong, Commander. Humans may be newcomers to galactic civilization, but we have one advantage that your people have forgotten. We never stop learning." Elena watched as several lights began blinking on her tactical console. Behind the scenes, her crew was making final preparations for what came next. She had handpicked every person aboard the Horizon's Edge for this mission, choosing not just for their skills, but for their willingness to take impossible risks. Your disruption field is indeed impressive, Chen continued, seemingly unaware of the Cathari commander's growing rage. It creates a localized quantum cascade that interferes with hyperspace field generation. The mathematics are quite elegant. However, there's one small flaw in your system. Impossible, Zethlock snarled. Our technology is perfect. No species has ever found a weakness. No species has ever tried to find one, Elena interjected. They were all too busy being afraid of you to think clearly, but humans, we don't stay afraid for long. She gestured to her engineer. Dr. Chen spent months analyzing the quantum signatures from your disruption field. He discovered that while the field prevents standard hyperspace jumps, it actually creates small gaps in local space-time. Gaps that can be exploited. Zethlock's forearms began moving to his control panels. Enough! You will pay tribute now, or face the consequences. All ships that have challenged the Cathari have died screaming. Actually, Chen said, checking his tablet, according to our calculations, no ship has ever really challenged you at all. They've all tried to fight you on your terms, using conventional weapons and tactics. We're going to try something different. Elena could see weapons platforms on the gate beginning to swivel toward her ship. The Cathari weren't patient negotiators. They preferred to solve problems with overwhelming firepower. She had counted on this. Elena Vasquez, she said formally, captain of the independent vessel Horizon's Edge, officially refusing tribute demand and claiming free passage rights. Then you have chosen death, Zethlock replied. Activate disruption field. All weapons, target the human ship. The space around the Horizon's Edge began to shimmer as the quantum disruption field powered up. Elena felt the familiar sensation of the ship's hyperspace drive going offline, cutting off their primary means of escape. On the screen, she could see Zethlock's satisfied expression as he prepared to add another victory to his record. Field, active, Commander, reported one of his officers. The human vessel is trapped. Excellent. Power weapons to full. I want them to know what happens to those who defy the Cathari Empire. But Elena was smiling now, and that worried Zethlock more than he wanted to admit. Humans who smiled in the face of certain death usually had something up their sleeves. Dr. Chen, she said quietly, initiate adaptive shielding protocol. The engineer's fingers danced across his console. Adaptive shielding online, Captain. All systems nominal. Suddenly, the Horizon's Edge began to change. The ship's hull, which had appeared to be standard durasteel plating, started to shift and flow like liquid metal. Sections of the vessel seemed to fold in on themselves, creating complex geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. What are you doing? Zethlock demanded, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty for the first time. Adapting, Elena replied simply. You see, Commander, humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. We've had 6 months to study your quantum disruption technology, and Dr. Chen has created something revolutionary, adaptive matter. The Horizon's Edge was now almost unrecognizable. Its hull had transformed into a crystalline structure that seemed to bend light around itself. The ship wasn't invisible, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to target with conventional sensors. The quantum disruption field creates specific frequency patterns, Chen explained, his excitement evident despite the danger. Our adaptive hull can match and counter those frequencies, essentially making our ship quantum transparent to your field effects. Zethlock's tactical officer was frantically working at his station. Commander, our targeting systems can't lock onto the human vessel. The quantum signature is shifting too rapidly. Impossible, Zethlock roared. No technology can counter our disruption field. No alien technology, Elena corrected. But humans? We specialize in doing the impossible. She turned to her pilot. Lieutenant Torres, prepare for Phase 2. The young woman's hands moved confidently across her controls. Phase 2 ready, Captain. Elena looked back at the screen, where Zethlock was clearly struggling to understand what was happening. For 50 years, his people had relied on the same tactics, the same technology, the same assumptions about their superiority. They had never faced an opponent who refused to play by their rules. Commander Zethlock, Elena said formally, you Have approximately 30 seconds to stand down your weapons and grant us passage. If you don't, we're going to demonstrate another human trait, our refusal to give up. You're bluffing, Zethlock snarled. One small ship cannot threaten the Nexus Gate. Elena's smile widened. Dr. Chen, would you like to show the commander what happens when human ingenuity meets Cathari arrogance? The engineer nodded enthusiastically. With pleasure, Captain. As Chen's fingers moved across his console, the space around the horizon's edge began to ripple. The quantum disruption field, which had been designed to trap ships, was suddenly working in reverse. Instead of preventing hyperspace jumps, it was amplifying them. Quantum cascade initiated, Chen reported. Field inversion in 3, 2, 1. The Nexus Gate shuddered as its own disruption field turned against it. Warning alarms began blaring throughout the massive station, as systems that had operated flawlessly for decades suddenly found themselves dealing with forces they weren't designed to handle. Elena watched Zethlock's expression change from arrogance to confusion to something approaching fear. The Cathari commander was finally beginning to understand that he wasn't dealing with just another victim. This is impossible, he whispered. This, Elena replied, is humanity. The human solution, Yuan. Nexus Gate groaned like a living thing as its own quantum disruption field turned against it. What had been designed as an unbreakable trap was now becoming a weapon in human hands. And Commander Zethlock was discovering that 50 years of unchallenged dominance had made his people dangerously overconfident. Sir, the Cathari tactical officer's voice cracked with panic. The disruption field is destabilizing power fluctuations throughout the station. Elena watched the chaos unfold on her screens while Dr. Chen monitored the quantum cascade he had initiated. The elderly engineer was in his element, his eyes bright with the joy of seeing his theoretical calculations work in practice. The beauty of it, Chen explained to Elena, though his voice was loud enough for the open communication channel to carry his words to the Cathari bridge, is that we're not actually attacking their station. We're simply using their own technology more efficiently than they are. On the main screen, Zethlock was frantically consulting with his officers. Elena could see the confusion in their movements, the way they kept looking at displays that no longer made sense. For 5 decades, they had been the masters of quantum technology in this region of space. Now, a human cargo hauler was teaching them new applications of their own science. Captain, reported Lieutenant Torres from the pilot station, we're receiving multiple communication requests from ships in the area. Word is spreading fast. Elena nodded. She had expected this. The Nexus Gate was one of the busiest hyperspace junctions in the galaxy, with dozens of vessels passing through every day. Most were merchant ships like her own, representing species that had been forced to pay the Cathari tribute for decades. Today, they were witnessing something unprecedented. Put the general channel on secondary display, she ordered. A smaller screen flickered to life, showing a grid of faces from various species. Blue-skinned Andorians, insectoid Zephyrians, the crystalline Vorthan, and others. All were watching the confrontation with a mixture of disbelief and hope. Attention, human vessel, came a transmission from an Andorian freighter captain. Are you actually standing up to the Cathari? We are, Elena replied simply. And we're proving that they're not as untouchable as they want everyone to believe. The response was immediate. Dozens of voices talking at once, sharing stories of Cathari brutality, of impossible tribute demands, of friends and family members who had been destroyed for the crime of not having enough to pay. For the first
time in 50 years, these victims had hope. Zethlock's voice cut through the chatter. Silence. All civilian vessels will maintain position and avoid interference or face immediate destruction. But his threat carried less weight now.
Several of the civilian ships were already moving closer to the horizon's edge, forming a loose protective formation. Elena realized that her small act of defiance was becoming something much larger. Commander, she said, addressing Zethlock directly, you're facing a choice. You can continue this escalation and risk destroying the very gate that gives you power, or you can be reasonable and negotiate. The Cathari do not negotiate with inferior species, Zethlock roared. Then you're about to learn why underestimating humans is a mistake, Elena replied calmly. Behind the scenes, her crew was executing the second phase of their plan. The Horizon's Edge wasn't just equipped with Dr. Chen's adaptive hull technology. It carried something else that would reshape the balance of power in this region of space. Dr. Chen, Elena said, initiate the liberation protocol. The engineer grinned and entered a complex sequence of commands. Suddenly, the Horizon's Edge began broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. Not a message, but a complete technical schematic. What are you doing now? Zethlock demanded. Sharing, Elena replied. Dr. Chen's adaptive shielding technology, complete with installation instructions and quantum frequency calculations, is now being transmitted to every ship in this system. In approximately 10 minutes, anyone with basic engineering knowledge will be able to modify their vessels to counter your disruption field. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the system, alien engineers were downloading the data and beginning to understand its implications. The Cathari monopoly on quantum control technology was ending in real time. But Elena wasn't finished. Computer, activate the second payload. Another data burst went out, this one containing detailed scans of the Nexus Gate's internal structure, including the locations and vulnerabilities of every weapon system, shield generator, and power conduit. 50 years of Cathari security through obscurity was being dismantled by human thoroughness and attention to detail. You're giving away military intelligence, Zethlock accused. I'm evening the odds, Elena corrected. Your people have maintained power through fear and superior technology. Take away the technological advantage, and what's left? The answer came from an unexpected source. On the Cathari bridge, a young communications officer named Kira had been watching the confrontation with growing unease. Unlike her commander, she had been listening to the civilian transmissions, hearing the stories of suffering and oppression that the human captain's actions were bringing to light. Commander, Kira said quietly, her voice barely audible over the chaos around them. Not now, Zethlock snapped, focused on trying to regain control of the situation. But Kira persisted. Sir, I've been monitoring communications from the civilian vessels. The humans aren't the only ones who've learned from studying our technology. Several of the merchant ships are already implementing modifications based on the transmitted data. Elena could see this conversation happening on her screen, and she recognized something in the young Cathari officer's expression. Doubt, perhaps even the beginning of conscience. The disruption field isn't just failing, Chen reported. It's being actively countered. I count at least 12 vessels that have successfully adapted their shields. Zethlock was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. His station's primary weapon was becoming useless. His victims were turning into potential enemies, and all of it was happening because one human ship had refused to pay tribute. You've destroyed everything, he raged at Elena. I've freed everyone, she replied, including your own people, though they may not realize it yet. She gestured toward Kira, who was now openly staring at the screen showing the civilian ships. Your communications officer understands. Look at her face, Commander. She's seeing her own people through the eyes of others for the first time, and she doesn't like what she sees. Kira looked up at that, meeting Elena's gaze across the void. For a moment, the young Cathari officer seemed about to speak, but Zethlock's roar cut her off. Weapons free. Destroy the human ship now, before they can do any more damage. But when his tactical officer tried to comply, nothing happened. The Horizon's Edge's quantum countermeasures had completely neutralized the gate's targeting systems, and the civilian ships were now close enough to interfere with any manual attacks. Sir, the tactical officer reported, his voice hollow with defeat. Weapons are offline. The humans have somehow reversed our quantum matrix. I can't get a lock on anything. Elena saw her moment and took it. Dr. Chen, one final demonstration. The engineer nodded and activated the third phase of their plan. The Horizon's Edge suddenly accelerated, not toward the gate but around it, moving in a complex spiral pattern that somehow amplified the quantum cascade effects. As it moved, the ship began broadcasting yet another signal, this one aimed directly at the gate's central computer core. "What are you doing to my station?" Zethlock demanded. "Upgrading it," Elena replied. "The Nexus Gate was built by the ancient builders as a free passage point for all species. Your people perverted its purpose by turning it into a weapon. We're simply restoring the original programming." Deep within the gate's core systems, human computer viruses were spreading through Cathari security protocols like wildfire through dry grass. But these weren't destructive programs. They were liberating ones, designed to remove the artificial restrictions that the Cathari had imposed on the ancient structure. Warning lights began flashing throughout the station as system after system reverted to its original configuration. The tribute collection databases were wiped clean. The weapon targeting systems defaulted to defensive mode only. The quantum disruption field generators shut down permanently. "Impossible," Zethlock shouted. "Those systems have quantum locks. No one can modify them." "No alien can modify them," Elena corrected. "But humans excel at solving problems that others consider impossible. We studied your people's modifications for months, traced them back to their source code, and figured out how to undo them. The transformation was remarkable. The Nexus Gate, which had loomed over the region like a predatory spider for 50 years, was becoming something else entirely. Ancient systems that had been dormant for centuries began coming online, including ones that the Cathari had never known existed. "Captain," Torres reported, her voice filled with wonder, "the gate is opening new hyperspace corridors. Routes that have been closed for decades are becoming available again." Elena smiled. This had been the real goal all along, not just to defeat the Cathari, but to restore the Nexus Gate to its original purpose as a hub of free galactic commerce. "All civilian vessels," she broadcast on the general channel. "You are now free to transit the gate without tribute. The ancient right of free passage has been restored." The response was overwhelming. Dozens of voices thanked her across multiple species and languages. Ships that had been trapped in expensive roundabout routes for generations could now travel freely through the galaxy's most important junction. But Elena wasn't finished with Zethlock yet. "Commander," she said, turning back to the main screen where the Cathari officer sat slumped in his command chair. "You have a choice to make. You can continue to be an enemy of free trade and galactic cooperation, or you can adapt to the new reality." "What new reality?" Zethlock asked, his voice hollow with defeat. "The reality where the Cathari Empire is just another species among many, instead of the galaxy's biggest bully. Your people have talents and knowledge that could benefit everyone, but only if you're willing to work with others instead of dominating them." Elena looked directly at Kira, who was listening intently. "Some of your people already understand this. Give them a chance to lead." Over the next hour, Elena watched as the transformation continued. The civilian ships began organizing themselves, creating an impromptu council to establish new protocols for gate usage. Several Cathari officers, led by Kira, began cooperating with the other species to ensure smooth transitions. Zethlock remained defiant to the end, but he was increasingly isolated as his own crew began to see the benefits of the new arrangement. The tribute system had enriched a few Cathari leaders while making enemies of dozens of other species. Free passage, on the other hand, would bring prosperity to everyone. As the Horizon's Edge prepared to depart, Elena received one final transmission from the gate. It was from Kira, who had apparently assumed command after Zethlock's removal by his own officers. "Captain Vasquez," the young Cathari said, "I wanted to thank you for showing us who we had become. It wasn't who we wanted to be." "Every species makes mistakes," Elena replied. "What matters is being willing to learn from them and do better." "We will," Kira promised. "The gate will remain free, and the Cathari will work to earn back the trust we've lost." As the Horizon's Edge jumped to hyperspace, leaving the transformed Nexus Gate behind, Elena reflected on what they had accomplished. They hadn't just won a battle, they had started a revolution. Across the galaxy, other oppressed species would hear about what happened here and realize that their oppressors weren't as untouchable as they claimed to be. Dr. Chen joined her on the bridge, still grinning with the satisfaction of a job well done. So, he said, "Where to next, Captain?" Elena smiled, looking out at the stars ahead. "Wherever we're needed, Doctor. The galaxy is full of bullies who think they're untouchable, and full of humans who love proving them wrong," he replied. As they flew toward their next adventure, word of their victory spread from system to system. The age of Cathari dominance was over, and the age of cooperation was beginning. All because one human ship had refused to give up, and one human crew had dared to prove that the impossible was just another problem waiting to be solved.